This evening, the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris took place this past week. Top political consultants join us to take a look at the impact the debate will have on the election. Then we're sitting down with the candidates for the Maricopa County Recorder's race. Republican candidate Justin Heap and Democratic candidate Tim Stringham talk about their campaign message going into the general election. This is Before You Vote. Welcome, I'm Mike Broomhead. Much of the focus this week has been on the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris, covering topics like the economy, abortion, and the border, all of the top issues for voters as we head into the crucial period for the general election. The vice presidential candidates have been out on the campaign trail as well. J.D. Vance had a rally here in Phoenix on September 5th, talking about the border, affordable housing, and Medicare, while Tim Walz stopped in Phoenix the same night as the presidential debate to talk about rising costs and the attack on freedom. And this is just the start of a memorable election season. Stay with us. Two of Arizona's top political consultants join me in studio. We'll evaluate this past week's presidential debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. And as much as I don't want to talk about this, there was a debate this week, and you may have missed it.
Really?
I think only 67 million people watched it.
Give or take.
But I want to get your opinions on this because, first of all, what you guys do for a living is advise people in this arena. I was surprised that it was so easy for her to get him on the defensive, and that's my perspective. Were you surprised by it?
I was caught off guard at how well she did it and how easily she did it.
But you agreed that she did that.
Yeah. Oh, the rally claim, the Nepo claim about his inherited wealth, those things burrowed quick because that was his immediate response. He didn't even go to the question. He went to defend himself.
If you were preparing a candidate for a situation, wouldn't you have said to your client, you know they're going to do these things, you gotta not dive into it.
Do not take the bait.
And would you have said those words?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 101. Don't run their campaign, run your campaign.
Well, and the rally question in particular, if he would have turned the table and said, why are you talking about crowd sizes?
Yeah.
You should be talking about your economic policy. It would have been an entirely different debate. Instead, he wound up in dogs and whether or not they're getting eaten by immigrants. I mean, we wound up in the theater of the absurd.
It's funny you say that because in my head, my rebuttal was, you're talking crowd sizes. Let's talk about how many immigrants are in this country. You want to talk about a crowd size?
Yeah.
I'm serious. You
You're
look
right.
at that, and
You're
I think
exactly right.
So, what happens when that's happening? What do you do next? I mean, because she said she'll debate again, and he said maybe, maybe not. Does he not need to do another debate?
I'm not sure there are any undecided voters anymore anywhere. I mean, I really think that what this debate did was give people permission to vote for her. And it's still going to be close as it gets. And the folks that were worried about whether or not she had it, that she could be the commander-in-chief, I think we're convinced she could.
I think that was the tactical advantage to her during the whole
Then why would
performance.
she agree to another one?
Because she wants to do it again to him. And she agrees, she is thinking that he is not a disciplined candidate, which he's not, and he doesn't listen to people. I'm sure they were telling him everything we're talking about here. Don't go there. Hit these three topics relentlessly. And she knows he doesn't have that. So I'm saying it's probably not a bad idea for her to roll the dice on that again.
If to use my boxing analogy, if I'm Buster Douglas, I want no part of Mike Tyson a second time. I'm serious. I beat him once. Yep. Nobody thought I could. There's my legacy.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear, from my perspective, I know we all know where we're voting,
right.
But I didn't hear enough about what and how they're going to do things. I wanted more substance.
Yeah.
But we didn't get that. But do you think that what people did hear was enough to get them to decide? Is that what you're saying?
I think that it was enough to give them the comfort to make that decision.
Okay.
But there were we're talking about economic policy. The question that should have been asked is, okay, I hear the down payment assistance on a new home. How are you going to pay for it?
Right.
And the fact that that next question wasn't asked is criminal. It really is, and the American people should know.
And about Medicare and about Social Security solvency, that wasn't addressed. Does there need to be a debate? If there is another debate, do we need to hear those questions of substance?
I mean, the Medicaid question, that he goes, well, I'll have a plan on that.
Right.
It's been 8 years, you've had time. And, there's nothing there. I would have a plan for him. I would say we need to go to a capitated system like Access nationally.
The one answer he gave that I thought was a reasonable answer was he said, I will work within the parameters of Obamacare if we can't come up with something better. I thought that was about the best answer he could give. If there's something better, we'll do it. But you're right. There was no this is better.
But he's not. I mean, look at the way he went through the Afghanistan withdrawal plan. He goes, well, we had all these points, this point, and that, never mentioned. The problem is, Mike, he's not a detailed guy. He doesn't have the discipline to sit down and read, as she did, about what to say. He is a gut level guy. And so you're asking for something that he's not capable of delivering, because I don't believe he has a grasp on those policy questions. His goal is to be a gut level guy, surround himself with people that can give him good policy guidance, and then let them navigate and let him be the judge.
All right. It's such a fun conversation, and I hope we get to do it again before this election's over.
Thanks for having us.
If there's an opportunity, we'll
All
be
right.
here.
Of course. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Maricopa County's recorder's race has been the talk of the election. We're sitting down with both candidates to get a look at their plan for the office. And first at the table is Justin Heap. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. County Recorder, Maricopa County, one of the most watched races in the country. Justin Heap, Republican candidate, joined us. First of all, congratulations on the win.
Thank you. Yeah.
But now the real work is going on. I mean, now it is time to, how does it change? Let's talk about that. Is there a change in strategy now that you are against a Democrat opponent?
My messaging has been fairly consistent. Mostly it's the groups you're speaking to. So I think when it's a Republican primary, you're talking mostly to PCs and committed volunteers. It kind of varies. So those groups tend to be, that's on your side. It's much harder in the primary to try to reach out to more moderate voters or to independents. So now that we're through the primary, but to win the primary, you need to win the majority of your party. So now that we're through that, now it's really just a message of who we're talking to, what meetings we're taking. So of course we're reaching out to, to more moderate Republicans who might not necessarily associate everything with the grassroots, and to independents, and even to Democrats.
So when you talk about the office, there are a lot of people that are not necessarily familiar with everything you do. Is it explaining to them why it's such an important office and your strategy of what needs to change? What are you approaching people with now that's different? Like, what is the message now?
Well, look, one thing that hasn't changed since the primary is that we do need to work a little bit on educating the voters, because we find about half the voters in Maricopa County don't know what the recorder does. They think that somehow recording county documents. They're not aware that they're the most important election official in the state, that 80% of the votes that come in through Maricopa County go through the county recorder's office, and it's a much more important job than most people have. So, and it was, getting out that message. Generally, we find that people are not happy with our election system. We've had, I think, at least 3 to 4 cycles now that have had huge systemic problems that are not being fixed. 2022 was one of the worst run elections in the country. People are upset about the elections, but weren't really sure who's responsible or who needs to be, what do we need to fix. So generally speaking, once we could explain to people, hey, we're in charge of elections, at least in the Republican primary, most Republicans would say, okay, yeah, I think I want change. And most of those voters, I think, would swing to me.
And explaining to people that your office handles the early voting, and so many people in Maricopa County vote early, whether they mail their ballots in or drop them off on Election Day. Are you talking to people about some of the specific things that need to change in that office with the early voting, or is that something you talk more about once you're in the office if you win the office?
Well, I mean, I try to address some of the sort of systemic issues that we've seen just, over and over again. We have I've talked to almost every group about the need for us to clean our voter rolls and to do a better job of that. We had the last two county recorders, both a Democrat and a Republican, ran saying they were going to clean those voter rolls. What we have found, though, and we've done hundreds of meetings with voters from all over Maricopa County, if you get a group of Maricopa County voters together and you ask them, how many of you in this room, you personally or you know someone who received extra ballots at their house from somebody else in the last election cycle? In every room, a quarter or more of the hands in every room will go up, which shows, and that's a huge reason why people don't trust it. It's hard for you to think, oh, the mail-in system is working well if you got multiple ballots at your address for somebody who doesn't live there. And we can't get that. So, I mean, that seems to be a clear systemic problem that we're seeing, and that's not a theory. That's me talking to voters and having talked to tens of thousands of voters who had this experience happen. This happened to me in 2022. I received ballots at my house, my address, and the name of someone who's never lived at my house. So, we really need to work on making sure that we are cleaning up our rolls, that we are sending out ballots only to lawful voters.
The rapport and relationship with the County Board of Supervisors obviously needs to be strong. Have you talked with anybody on the board about what that office is going to look like when you're there? And if so, can you let us in on some of those conversations?
Sure. I haven't talked to any of the two boards that are the two members that are staying on the board, but we have one seat that's open and two other Republicans. I know very well the two conservative candidates that I think of taking over, and that's Mark Stewart and Debbie Lesko, coming from Congress. I have a good relationship with them. We talk quite frequently because I understand there's a lot of give and take. We've bifurcated it. They're in charge of the day of elections and the tabulation. I do the early ballot, but we have to work together because there's a lot of overlap in those roles. And I'm optimistic that the board will be willing to listen to some of my recommendations and take some steps to make the process more transparent and more streamlined.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time. I know it's very busy for you. We appreciate the time in the primary and now in the general. Wish you the best, and hopefully after this is over, we'll talk again.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you.
All right, Justin Heap is candidate for Maricopa County Recorder. Make sure you're an informed voter. We'll be back in a moment. Democratic candidate Tim Stringham sits down with us next. Find out how he plans to advocate for voters. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Our interviews with County Recorder for Maricopa County. Joining us now, Democrat candidate Tim Stringham. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to meet you.
Pleasure.
A lot of attention in this office in the last few years. A lot of people looking at this office. Let's talk about your ideas. What needs to happen in that office if you win it?
Well, for starters, I think we've got a great office. We have an enormous county recorder office. 65% of all Arizona voters are here in Maricopa County. And yes, we've had some issues with our elections, but those issues have boiled down to printer issues. I don't think that any of the negativity around the office really meets a level where people need to be worried. And so if I take over the office, what I really want to do is continue to run it in a responsible manner, learn, listen, and we'll take a hard look at the details.
When you look at the perception versus reality, how do you restore faith? There are some people that are just set in their ways, but there are other people that have legitimate questions.
Yeah.
How do you answer those questions, or what information do they need to have so they have confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you shouldn't just take your government's word for anything. You should have skepticism. That's why we have separation of powers. That's why we have diffused government authority. That's why we have federalism. But look, a lot of the false narratives around the county recorder office started with Donald Trump saying that Stephen Richard, the incumbent, had deleted the voter rolls. Not only was that abjectly false, but now we're hearing people say the opposite, that we haven't trimmed the voter rolls enough. Then you had Kari Lake saying that we inserted fake ballots into the process. Not only was that false, but Kari Lake's already admitted that in court. So does that mean you shouldn't criticize your government? No. You should always have concerns. You always want to take a close look. But everybody keeps asking what the elections office is going to do to restore faith. I'd like to know what Donald Trump and Kari Lake are going to do to restore faith after their lies.
And when you look at, and I think those are legitimate questions, when you look at where people are concerned, how long it takes to count votes. And there are a lot of things, I'll give you an example. I vote early, but I vote at the polls. In other words, I'm busy on election day. So I'll take my ballot and drop it off. Why does that vote need to be cured if I'm standing right there? Why isn't there a process where they can count my ballot as soon as I get there?
Yeah, Mike, I'm glad you asked that. There's actually legislation coming down the pipeline. I think in 2026 we'll already see that as a possibility. But what you just described are what's commonly called late earlies.
Right.
20% of all voters drop off their ballot at the polls. You've signed the envelope. It has to go through a ballot curing process. And so when that ballot finally gets to the tabulation center around midnight, they still have to go through a long process to cure it. Now, we have a lot of people that really want to see a greater percentage of people show their IDs when they drop off the vote. To me, that's where to do it. You'd have the sensation of knowing, hey, I got to see that it was tabulated. I know that my vote counted right there. The voters and the people watching would be able to see the results out just a little bit quicker on election night. And it actually would save the recorder's office, the elections department, a lot of work. It's a lot easier if you show your ID and stick it into a tabulator than if they have to go through the process of curing your ballot. So to me, that's the kind of common sense compromise that can move this process a little bit further in the right direction for everybody.
You mentioned voter rolls a few moments ago. We've heard of incidents where people are getting ballots mailed to their home where people don't live there, or there are people that are on the voter rolls after they move or they pass away. Is there a need to make sure the voter rolls only have registered active voters?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of different ways in which the recorder's office already does that. I think first off, you need to keep it in perspective. There are 2.4 million voters in the Valley. 2.4 million voters. That means that yeah, there are going to be some people that hang on the voter rolls longer than they should. But the number one thing you can do if you're concerned about that, type in beballotready.vote on the internet. You can enter into your own voter profile, and you can make sure that your information is correct right now. Don't move and 6 months from now forget about it, and then they're going to send a ballot to the wrong address. Now, if that happens, we still do have safeguards, right? You have to sign under penalty of perjury that you have the right to vote. And we have a curing process for those ballots. But it saves taxpayer money and it saves you hassle and it makes everybody feel better about the system if you go to beballotready.vote tonight and update your voter registration information.
All right, last question then is about what the office needs. What would you say is the immediate need for the next person that holds this office?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that it's very easy to break a thing. If you have concerns, absolutely, we want to address those concerns. It's very important that you don't have a government institution that has tens of millions of dollars every year in its budget, 140 full-time personnel, and have somebody in there who's going to be careless. You can't promise to fire everybody before you've even figured out what the human resources guides are. I think everybody who has a job, has a boss, knows that bosses very often make your job more difficult. The best bosses, shut up and listen. That's what I'm going to do for the first 90 days. We'll shut up and listen. We're not going to pretend like we know everything, and we're not going to produce solutions to problems that may or may not actually exist.
I appreciate the time. It's good to meet you, and I wish you well. And after the election's over, I hope we talk again.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Mike.
All right, his name is Tim Stringham. He is the candidate, the Democrat candidate for Maricopa County Recorder. Be an informed voter. We'll be back in a moment. Thank you to Maricopa County Recorder candidates Justin Heap and Tim Stringham, as well as political consultants Stacey Pearson and Chuck Coughlin for joining us this week. All of our past interviews are on cw7az.com/vote. If you miss an episode or want to rewatch them, head over there for more information. The general election debates kicked off at the beginning of September. You can head over to our website to watch all of them as they happen. We'll see you next Sunday right here on Before You Vote.